one of the things that the Conservative government has achieved in 14 years in government is generally status on some of these questions. So having been pushed very hard by progressive campaigners and by institutions that have been captured by campaigners, the government has effectively not given them what they wanted. I mean, obviously on the trans thing, that was not without a big battle, but the campaigners didn't win. And I think that this is something that people who, you'll know, of course, a lot of people on the right in Britain are very frustrated with the Conservative government. I think that it's something that people underestimate, though, about how bad Labour could be in terms of currently we've had the government kind of damming this flow, and I think that could all disappear and we could see enormous changes and some really bad legislation.
Yeah. Yes, I completely agree. And of course, the common criticism of people when any of us speak up about these issues is, well, you've been in power for 14 years. Why haven't you sorted it out? And, that's a fair criticism. And certainly the government could have done more. But if you look at what's happened across the Western world, especially every English speaking country, these trends are international. You look at what's happened in Canada and America and Australia under governments of all different political persuasions, because the culture that has swept through these issues is above politics. It's certainly above the influence that individual politicians and even governments have. And a lot of that, I think, is to do with social media, which has been this phenomenal force that the world has never seen before. And we're only just now starting to recognize the influence of social media. But yeah, what government could have stood up against those forces? I don't think there is one. And I think the Conservative government has probably, as you say, resisted and held the line more than a Labour government would. And I suppose all that, the polls seem clear that Labour are going to come to power. And I suppose that all that people like me and my colleagues can do is try to continue to make the case, shift the public debate. And the public debate has shifted on the trans issue. I mean, just 2 years ago, very few mainstream papers would print gender critical writers. And indeed, there's some high profile cases of people leaving The Guardian, for example, because of that attitude. And yet in 2 years, with a combination of high profile left wing women like J.K. Rowling and Rosie Duffield, and then the Conservative government kind of coming around to this point of view, we have definitely shifted the debate in Britain and actually rode back. If you look at Scotland, if you look at Liz Truss deciding not to go down gender self-ID in England. So I am more hopeful on the trans issue for a Labour government than I would have been a year ago. But there are a lot of other issues where I think, people have underestimated how much the Conservative government has actually held the line on these issues.
Okay, what's an example? What are you really worried about that Labour might do in one of the issues that you're really invested in?
Well, I think assisted dying. I think Keir Starmer has said recently that he would allow a vote on that. Surrogacy, potentially. The Law Commission have set out some recommendations that would liberalise surrogacy rules in the UK, essentially give surrogate mothers fewer rights. Conversion therapy, that's a very live issue. Again, the Labour Party are fairly committed to a ban on conversion therapy. And, like all these issues, on first encountering them, you think, well, of course. I mean, what a dreadful thing to try and change someone's sexuality. What a dreadful thing to stop someone wanting to become a parent. What a dreadful thing to try and stop someone who's suffering intolerably from dying. And of course, those are the initial arguments that, of course, these campaigns rely on. But like all these issues, when you really dig down into what it means for human freedom, for the protection of the vulnerable, for this kind of change on a societal level that would happen if these legislative changes happen, they are scary. And assisted dying, for one example, if you look at any country in the world that's done it, and there are quite a few examples now, it always starts off with campaigners saying we want really strong safeguards. This is only for the very, very terminally ill. But in every single time, gradually more and more people are added onto the list of who can use this service, if you like. In some countries, children have been included. In some countries, it now accounts for 4% of deaths. And of course, the societal change that is embedded once you say actually it is okay for somebody's life not to be worth anything anymore. I mean, that's a huge psychological shift for any country to take. And of course, once the law has accepted that it's a good thing sometimes for somebody to die, then, where does that stop? And I think those are the kind of things I mean, I don't want to be pessimistic, but I think a free vote under a Labour government, particularly a Labour government with a large majority, I think there's no question that it would pass, unless there's some very serious and very good, effective campaigning from now until an election or until the legislation was brought forward.
Yeah, one of the things that's troubling about assisted dying being legalised in this country is because we have socialised healthcare, and
Yes.
also because we have a large welfare state and state pension and so on. It's not in the interests of the state actually to keep, say, frail elderly people alive, or people, or disabled
Yeah,
people. Just purely in financial interests. It's not in the state's interests. And so,
absolutely.
if it suddenly becomes possible to legally, you know, remove those people from the books, basically, in terms of the financial burden, it's going to be hard, I think, for even the best intentioned. This is the nature of systems. Like, the people within the system might all be very well intentioned, but if this is what the law funnels people towards, and that's likely to end up happening. Although the joke I saw on Twitter recently is a dark joke, but it did make me laugh, is you'll be told on the NHS that you have 6 months to live because you have a terminal
Yes.
diagnosis. But we can add you to the waiting list for assisted dying, which is 12 months. Like, it may,
Yes. Well, that kind of sums up the state of our healthcare system. I
yeah, it
think
does a
there is
bit.
a more nuanced debate behind this. I mean, as I said, I'm utterly opposed to legalizing assisted suicide, because I think as I said before, the law is a teacher. Once the law says it's good, beneficial, acceptable to end someone else's life, then that's a huge cultural change that will only go, there is a slippery slope from that moment onwards. And there's another number of other legislative changes that we can point to that prove that. But I do think there is a more nuanced debate, because we do now, in the way that we didn't 50 years ago, offer a huge amount of treatments to people, even in their 80s and 90s, that prolong life, perhaps beyond what is comfortable for people. And I think there is a conversation to be had about how doctors work with patients who get into their 80s and 90s. Is it sensible to treat someone for cancer in their 80s and 90s? I think these are the kind of, we should be talking about those things very sensitively, of course, but that is an entirely different thing from saying that it's okay for someone to end their own life for various reasons. So, I think we need a more nuanced debate. And the problem with debate at the moment, particularly because of social media, is it's very hard to have a nuanced debate. It's all headlines. It's all short sentences. And I don't know what the answer is to that.